Welcome to this discussion hosted by the Asia Scotland Institute, at which I'm absolutely delighted to welcome and introduce Dr. Azeem Ibrahim. Azeem is a research professor at the Strategic Studies Institute of the US Army War College, and also a director at the Center for Global Policy in Washington. He received his doctorate from the University of Cambridge, after which he completed fellowships at the universities of Oxford, Harvard, and Yale. And over the years, Azeem Ibrahim has advised over half a dozen world leaders on strategy and policy development, with his most recent role being the strategic policy advisor to the chairman of Pakistan's PTI party, Prime Minister Imran Khan. Azeem is also the author of the seminal book, The Rohingyas Inside Myanmar's Genocide. And we are very lucky to have him with us today to talk about the situation with the Rohingyas as the Gambia brings a case against Myanmar for the genocide being committed on the Rohingyas by that country. And so now, Azeem, it's with the greatest of pleasure that I would like to turn the subject over to you so that you could talk to us about it.
Thanks so much, Roddy, and absolute pleasure to be back with yourself and the Scotland Asia Institute. Fantastic work that you're doing, and I certainly hope that we can meet up again soon in person once all of this crisis is behind us. Yeah, so obviously the Western news cycle was completely dominated by the COVID situation, so a lot of stuff has passed us without us noticing, and one of them was the unprecedented situation that we find ourselves in with the International Court of Justice, the Gambia, Myanmar, and the Rohingya crisis. So just to give you a very quick, some of your viewers, a very quick synopsis of how this actually came about, is that the Rohingya is an ethnic minority group in Myanmar. They have been described by the United Nations as the most persecuted minority in the world. Over the last half century, they have faced wave after wave of violence, and this culminated in 2016, 2017, in which the Myanmar military engaged in a huge effort to essentially ethnically cleanse all the Rohingya from their country. So they essentially expelled over 750,000 Rohingya from the Rakhine region into Bangladesh. And this has been described as a genocide by most experts in the world, because it was a systematic and organized campaign to eliminate the Rohingya, to eliminate their identity, to eliminate their culture. So there's over 1 million Rohingya now refugees in Bangladesh, in what is the largest refugee camp in the world. I've been there myself many times, and it is quite a horrific sight. You can climb the highest hill and look around you, and all you see is a sea of humanity over the horizon. Over 1 million people living in mud and squalor, with absolutely no hope and no pathway to actually get back to the homeland. And Bangladesh, as you're aware, is a country that's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. It's a poor country. For them to absorb, over 1 million refugees is a very big ask. So Bangladesh is very keen on returning the Rohingya to Myanmar, and the international community has so far shown very little interest in this whole situation. And this changed recently, very recently actually, when a small country called the Gambia in Africa decided to pursue a case in the International Court of Justice against Myanmar. And this was pioneered by the Gambia's Justice Minister, Minister Abu Bakr, and he was actually a former prosecutor at the ICC, and he visited the camps in Bangladesh. He's seen the situation that the Rohingya were living in, and came to the conclusion that this is a clear case of genocide. So he himself, on his own initiative, put together a case with a legal firm in the United States to pursue Myanmar in the International Court of Justice. So this is very different from the International Criminal Court, which most people will actually be aware of. Most people will be familiar with the International Criminal Court that brings war criminals to justice, Slobodan Milosevic and others, and Karadzic and so on. This is not a criminal action that the Gambia is pursuing. This is a civil, almost like a civil action. So the International Court of Justice is a court of arbitration. So the Gambia has, under the Genocide Convention of 1948, pursued a legal action against Myanmar for undertaking genocide against the Rohingya population. So the court had a hearing late last year, and it came to the conclusion, a unanimous conclusion, that Myanmar must do everything it can to ameliorate the situation of the remaining Rohingya in Myanmar. So they have to take a number of steps to demonstrate that they have put a stop to this genocide and they are correcting the situation. Now, the court has not made a determination of genocide, because that is a process that actually takes a long time. It could take up to 10 to 15 years, in fact. And but so far they have made you could say it's almost like a caution. We would say, in basically in civilian terms, it's almost like a police caution that we have to demonstrate that that they're taking the necessary steps to fix the situation with the Rohingya remaining in their country. And so Myanmar had to report back to the ICJ, to the Court of Justice, which they have done so. But that information is not in the public domain. So there's actually the information is only reported to the ICJ and to the Gambia. So we really don't know in which capacity they've actually reported. But I think most experts understand from the information that they have in the public domain that Myanmar has not really done anything at all to fix the situation. So the next steps will be very interesting, because much of this, Roddy, is just completely uncharted territory. This is actually breaking new ground in international law, and the implications of this and how the court behaves and what happens after this and how international partners behave will be very interesting, because this is the first time that we've actually come this far in the ICJ. It was very interesting because a number of countries, the most interesting thing for me is that, we have this convention, the 1948 Genocide Convention, and we have said repeatedly, almost on a regular basis, that, never again will the world tolerate a genocide. And we've seen multiple genocides since this convention came into force, from Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, the list goes on. And the Rohingya is just essentially the next genocide to add to this very long and sad list. But the most surprising thing for me, and I'm not an international lawyer, is that it took this tiny little country, the Gambia, to initiate this action, when almost every country that we know of is a signatory to this convention. None of them believed or had the wherewithal or the ability, not the ability, but even the intention of actually upholding this convention. But now that the Gambia has initiated this action, there's a number of other countries that are interested in either joining it or supporting it. We've had information from the Maldives, for example, another tiny country, that they will be joining the action. So they've made this announcement publicly. Other countries have said they would support the action. So countries like Canada and Sweden and so on, they said they support it, but we don't know in which capacity. It might just be a fact that they support it. But I think this has been a fascinating education for me, that we have all these conventions that were actually developed. Many of them were pioneered by the Brits, but we're not standing behind them. And this is the most fascinating thing about this.
And Azeem, how did you first get involved with the whole Rohingya thing? Because I know you've written a very good book about it, which you talked about when you were in Scotland with us. What prompted you to get involved in the first place?
Yeah. So it's interesting, Roddy. It's actually just happened by accident. I'm not a genocide scholar. I'm not an international lawyer. But I came across the issue of the Rohingya, almost a decade ago. And this was the first time I even heard the word Rohingya. And I remember reading somewhere that they've been described by the UN as the most persecuted minority in the world. And as you're fully aware, Roddy, there's unfortunately no shortage of groups that could claim that title. These groups, we just have to turn on the TV to see how many groups around the world, would claim that they are the most persecuted, from Yemen, Syria, Falun Gong, the Uyghurs. There's no shortage, but the UN described this group as the most persecuted. So when I tried to do some research on them, I tried to look into what the situation was with this group. I was quite astonished to find that there's almost no information out there about them. There was these group people were completely unknown. There was no campaigns. There was no celebrity endorsements behind them. There wasn't a single book written about these people and how they managed to get this very unfortunate title. So I spent a number of years just kind of researching it, writing various op-eds and publications, and then I decided to make a trip to the region. So I made a few trips to the region, to Bangladesh, to the camps, and then also to Myanmar itself at a time when one could get access to Myanmar. This was around 2013, 2014. So I visited the camps. I collected a lot of data from various Rohingya dissidents. I visited, other countries around the region that were trafficking routes for these people, and the book was a product of that. So the book is essentially just looking at some of the claims and some of the history of the Rohingya and how they managed to become the most persecuted people in the world.
Your book, of course, is still for sale. Have you got a copy there in front of you?
I may have a copy somewhere on the book.
It doesn't matter. You could have held it up, but people can get it on Amazon, and the title is.
It's Rohingya Inside Myanmar's Genocide, and you can see it online. It's rohingyabook.com. It's a website that explains the book.
And Azeem, let me ask you this other question. I mean, Aung San Suu Kyi, who was the leader there, of course, she's been a Nobel Peace Prize winner and one thing and another. The supreme irony is that she has not been able to do anything about this. Did you meet her in your course of your studies and research?
No, Roddy, I didn't meet her. I was actually going to meet her at one point at a conference in Tokyo many years ago, but she didn't turn up. I don't think she'd probably want to meet with me, and in fact, I probably don't want to meet with her either. So I don't think it's a question of that she's not been able to do anything. I think it's much more of a question, and this is now accepted across the board, is that she simply didn't want to do anything. I think one of the questions I get asked very often, and even when I meet with policymakers, is that how did we get Aung San Suu Kyi so wrong? And if you do a little bit of digging and you do a little bit of research, and I've written about this extensively as well, is that you realise that we actually didn't get her wrong. We simply chose to believe what we wanted to believe. You see, we in the West have a need to have our heroes on a pedestal. We like to have our heroes on a pedestal who are untarnished and pure and fit our image, and her story is one of the best stories that you will come across. It's almost like a Hollywood movie. Here is the daughter of one of the founding generals of Myanmar who was assassinated, and now she was placed under house arrest by her father's former colleagues. She's Oxford educated, she speaks the Queen's English, she's a Nobel laureate, she was young and beautiful. Now she's out of prison, she's opening up her country to democracy, human rights and markets and everything. And this is fantastic. We love this kind of stuff. So we tend to ignore all the other signs that are out there, and many scholars have actually looked into her background. And I wrote a piece in Newsweek in which I interviewed over half a dozen people who knew her intimately for decades, including the founder of the Free Aung San Suu Kyi campaign and another individual who used to smuggle papers to her in prison at huge risk to himself. And all of them told me on the record that Aung San Suu Kyi is a Burma Buddhist nationalist. She always has been, and she actually believes that Myanmar is a country that's only for the Burma Buddhists, and all these other minorities just happen to be there, and they don't actually belong there. So she's essentially has the same ideology as the military. And if you look at her, even her speeches now, and this is now well documented, journalists from the BBC and elsewhere have had interactions with her in which she's kind of made a lot of this stuff clear. That she is essentially one of the main obstacles by which none of this, there's been no improvement in the situation. And you've seen this when she came to the ICJ as well, which was quite a surprise move. She turned up in the International Court of Justice to defend the military. There's no talk about any of the rape camps, the genocide, the mass graves, and it was just a question of her trying to spin the military's lies. And we've seen this now as well. There was another piece that I wrote early on in 2018 in which I made the argument that the Rohingya are only the first group that the Myanmar military is targeting. Once they have finished with the Rohingya, they will turn their attention onto other minority groups. And this is precisely what is happening. There has been a significant increase in violence against other minority groups, including other Buddhist groups that are not Bamar, including the Kachin, the Shen, the Karen. These are all minority groups. And Aung San Suu Kyi's attitude is that, in her words, is that we need to crush all of these groups. This is exactly her words. So,
do these groups, are they all? Is the region called the Rakhine? Is that right? Are they all in that same region?
Yeah. So most of them are.
And the other thing is that Myanmar or Burma used to be referred to as the Scottish colony, didn't it? There are strong links with Scotland, where of course you were born as well, that make it, if you like, all the more important that we should have our eyes open and do something about this. I'm sure that we can exercise some influence eventually on the thinking of the people there, or is that a lost cause?
Yeah, I think we can exercise. The UK in particular, it is a former colony, and we do have a certain amount of responsibility, and so I think we can actually exercise a lot of influence in this situation. And my argument now would be that is referring earlier what we were discussing earlier about the ICJ. Now that this action has started and other countries will be joining, I think the United Kingdom has an obligation as the former colonial power to actually join this action and hold those people to account. Particularly, this is being done. We've been criticised in the past, Roddy, as you're aware of, not following international law, or foreign policy was dysfunctional and so on. And now this is an opportunity to use the full levers and powers of international law to enact a policy that will ensure that justice is at the end of the line for these people. And I think the precedents, and for the UK to take a leading role in this is extremely important.
Well, we've seen in recent days the position that the British government's taken with regards to people in Hong Kong, and the granting of citizenship, or the renewal of citizenship to people. And we appear to be taking a moral stand there, but not doing anything on Myanmar, which of course is bizarre. How do you see this playing out? I mean, let's say the court finds against them eventually. What will then happen?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Roddy, and this is actually one of the unknowns, because this is unprecedented and this is uncharted territory. So I'm not even sure if the court actually knows themselves how this actually eventually kind of plays out. There's no case study of this actually happening. I think the International Court of Justice is the court of the United Nations. So this is the official international arbitration court of the UN. So I believe that if the court comes to a decision, and this could take a long time, but if they come to a decision that genocide has occurred and Myanmar is not upholding its responsibilities as a signatory to the Genocide Convention, then the onus will fall upon the Security Council to then enforce the court's action. If the Security Council, because of their veto from China or elsewhere, fails to do so, then I think that puts the whole international system into complete disrepute, simply because here you have a situation in which your own court, the United Nations' own court, its actions are not being enforced by the United Nations. So it kind of makes all of these international bodies, quite useless, which is an argument.
The very scale of this, and the statistics I recall are terrible. Not only the awful things happening, but the methodical program of rape of women and the like is horrifying. It would suggest that you need to have a sort of Nuremberg type trial where the generals are brought forward and other key figures in the country. Do you see that ever happening?
I think that as it stands at the moment, and this is one of the huge dysfunctionalities of the international system, is that as long as Myanmar has China as a protectorate, at the Security Council, and China has so far vetoed almost every single action, even statements of condemnation or statements of transparency. So as long as that is in place, it's unlikely that any of these people, will see the inside of a courtroom. But you're absolutely right in terms of the scale of the atrocities. There was a report done by the United Nations Human Rights Commission in 2016, in which they said 52% of the Rohingya females that had reached the camps in Bangladesh had been raped. And so this is essentially the majority. The majority of them had actually been victims of sexual violence. And the interesting thing is that when the BBC's Fergal Keane asked Aung San Suu Kyi about this, she said in response, she said this. She basically made excuses for the military, but her Facebook page said this is fake rape. So this was her word. So she's essentially a denialist. And even when she was asked about ethnic cleansing, she said this is ethnic cleansing is far too strong a term to use for what's happening. Both sides are equally to blame. So drawing a moral equivalence between the aggressor and the victim, which is for many people this is moral bankruptcy of the highest order.
Some of the honours that she's being given, freedom of cities, doctorates of universities, have been removed. Was there one at University of Glasgow? I can't recall, but certainly in Scotland, some of the honours and awards that she was given, as I say, have been rescinded, which is a start. But I wonder, you talk about China quite rightly. What's India's position on all of this?
So India and Prime Minister Modi has obviously he's taken a much more kind of aggressive nationalist stand against his own Muslim population. He's a follower of the Hindutva kind of extremist ideology, which is incidentally not related to Hinduism. It might share a similar kind of name, but it's much more of an extremist, nationalist, far-right kind of ideology, and this is his kind of base and his platform. So he himself has taken a very aggressive stand against some of the Rohingya refugees in India, and he has said that he would be repatriating some of them and removing them from the country because they were there illegally. Now the difficulty he has is that he's got nowhere to actually repatriate them to, because no country actually wants to take them in. And Myanmar certainly is not going to take them in, but he has unfortunately taken a position which is certainly not very helpful to the Rohingya situation.
And in describing the Rohingyas as you do in your book, what are the attributes that you would associate them with? Do they have, some of them presumably were farmers, obviously. Are they people with a lot of arts and crafts capabilities? Do they produce thinkers? It's difficult, of course, in a camp, but have they historically produced leaders and thinkers and writers?
No, so that's a great question. The Rohingya obviously have their own culture, their own history, their own language, which goes back centuries. And this is well documented. And this is one of the things I've tried to do in my book, is that the main accusation made against the Rohingya is that all of these people were illegal immigrants from Bangladesh, and they came over from Bangladesh after the Second World War. They manufactured this word called Rohingya, which is essentially gives them a connection to the land, and now they should all go back to Bangladesh. So this is the main accusation. So one of the things I tried to do in my book is to look at the veracity of this accusation, and I dug up documents from the Indian National Archives in New Delhi, other documents which actually show that as far back as 1898, the Rohingya were recognised as a minority group in that region, by the British Colonial Office. There was an individual called Charles Patton who did an extensive survey looking at a lot of this stuff. So, but the unfortunate reality is that you're referring to the culture and the history, is that Myanmar has been engaged in a process of disenfranchisement of this people to deny them education, to deny them access to healthcare and basic schooling, college education. So one of the difficulties that the Rohingya people have is that there's not many amongst them, even with a basic education. And this was an overt policy to kind of deny them leadership. And, and this has been a real challenge for them, because there is really nobody there to advocate for them on the international stage. And so they can't advocate for themselves domestically, let alone internationally. And I've given presentations on this topic, in various places, universities and institutions and government offices. And one of the questions I always ask the audience is that, look, you have come here because you're clearly interested in the topic of the Rohingya, but I bet you not a single one of you can name me a single Rohingya person anywhere in the world, and none of them ever can, and this is the reality. If I were to mention another, famous cause to you, for example, the Palestinian cause, irrespective of what side you stand on that, you can name me a few Palestinians. You can name me Yasser Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas, Edward Said, the academic, Gigi Hadid, the supermodel. You can't name me a single Rohingya person, because there's nobody of Rohingya origin, working in Silicon Valley that's made, millions of an app that can say, I'm going to put $5 million of my money into a public awareness campaign for my people. There's nobody of Rohingya origin in the British Parliament, European Parliament, or elsewhere that can make this, advocate for the people, lobby for the people. There's nobody of Rohingya origin working in CNN or Al Jazeera that can take this on as a pet project. These people.
Why is that, Azeem? Why is it so surprising? You'd think that in the United Kingdom, which has been the recipient of many people from former colonies, that no Rohingyas made their way to the UK, to Scotland, and that there's not a group of them somewhere in the British Isles.
Yeah, no, there's plenty of Rohingya refugees. It's just the fact that their community is very, very, it's in the very early stages of development. There's hardly anybody amongst them. We have now a number of Rohingya organisations, including in the UK, but they're essentially just startups. It's one man and a fax machine working, or an email address working from his bedroom. And I can
are there parallels, for example, with the way in which indigenous people were treated in the United States of America, and the Aborigines treated in Australia, and the Maoris in New Zealand? Are those parallels, or is this on a completely different scale?
I think there's plenty of parallels there. This is an organised campaign by Myanmar to completely eliminate the entire people, and not just eliminate them physically, but eliminate their name. So if you go to Myanmar, for example, and this is Western leaders have told me this, US senators that I've met, members of Congress have told me this, is that they were informed that you cannot say the word Rohingya in Myanmar. And one of them was actually Senator Dick Durbin, and he was a very senior senator in the United States, and he told me personally that when he went to Myanmar, he was informed by the embassy, the US embassy, that if you say the word Rohingya, all of your meetings will be cancelled and the trip will be over. And if you recall, Roddy, even when the Pope went to Myanmar, he did not use the word Rohingya, because he was told that there would be a backlash against the Catholics, and he had to wait till he arrived in Bangladesh before he could say the word. So this is a systematic, organised campaign, not just to eliminate the people, but to eliminate their name, so they simply do not exist. So the parallels between the Aborigines and others is actually quite, the parallels are certainly there.
I'm sure, Doug, that you may have a couple of questions or so for Azeem. So over to you.
Roddy, thank you. Azeem, thank you. It's an interesting subject. It's clearly important for institutions like the International Court of Justice to hold repressive regimes to account. But you've intimated, and I suspect that what we really need is people on the ground that can preserve evidence, and that's clearly not happening. So this process is going to take a long time. And so my sense is that this institution doesn't really have the teeth to deliver what's required. And at a time when we're looking at other multilateral institutions like WTO and the World Health Organization at the moment. So I just wonder what your thoughts are about these sorts of institutions, and how do we properly empower them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think what we've seen recently with the WHO in particular in the COVID crisis has actually demonstrated that many of these global institutions are simply, that we have relied upon over the last 70, 80 years, are simply not up to the job anymore, and that a new system is actually required. I believe, and this is my personal belief, of the new idea from the UK government of the D10, the 10 leading kind of democracies in the world, is much more viable than the United Nations Security Council. And these are old institutions that are completely dysfunctional. And in many respects, I believe that institutions like the Security Council are actually a hindrance and a massive obstacle to international justice, international law, simply because if something's not approved by the Security Council, then it's regarded as being illegal, even though it's, it would be the completely correct thing to do. For example, our intervention in Kosovo, which wasn't authorised, and that was to stop a genocide, an ongoing genocide, and that was to stop, Milosevic's troops, engaging in mass murder. Because that wasn't authorised, that's considered illegal, but it was a NATO operation led by democracies, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how these organisations and how these institutions are actually up to the mark. I personally believe, and I've had a lot of interaction with the UN, the Security Council. I've been there a number of times now. I've met with various members of the Security Council when this crisis was first erupting, and I came away deeply disappointed and at the whole functionality of it. To me it was a completely dysfunctional institution. It was all just down to complete and utter horse trading between the great powers, and what's the order of the day. So I wasn't impressed, and I share your opinion that we really do need a re-examination of the international order. And I personally believe that there has to be a much more democratically aligned global alliance, almost like a league of democracies that examine these things and take action where appropriate.
We would like to raise this topic so that it's more in the sort of, to get share of mind of people, because whilst, as you say, people are preoccupied with COVID-19 and the pandemic, I fear that within these camps where the Rohingyas are, there will be a terrible death rate of people. I can't see how that can be avoided, just as is going to happen with the Syrian refugee camps as well. So we're very grateful to you for talking to us today. Wish you a lot of luck with what you're doing, and hope to see you back in Bonnie, Scotland, when physical meetings are allowed again. So thanks very much, Azeem.
Absolutely, buddy. No, thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much, Doug. And I look forward to it, and hopefully we'll all meet again very soon.
Very good. Super. Thanks very much.
Azeem, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.